manage all of the insect collections in the museum. And there's a lot of specimens, in part because some 80% of the species diversity on the planet is within insects. So that's a lot of species relative to everything else, right? So we have our work cut out for us. This is our work area. We do a lot of digitization, so that's something that's going on across the whole museum, trying to get all the data associated with the specimens and photos of the specimens online so that researchers can access that from a distance. That way we don't have to have people coming in. It's better for the specimens because they're safer, and it allows us to sort of globalize the research that is going on in here. So we usually have anywhere from 1 to 10 undergrads in here working at a time on digitizing specimens. Before we get to that state, we sort the specimens. So here are some moths. These are sphingiid moths, hawk moths. So we'll sort them by species and by the locality, and then the students will transcribe that data. So that's all accessible on the database, which the public can access through the Peabody's website. So anyone can look at that.
And would that stuff have like native location?
It has where each specimen was collected.
Okay.
So if you get an invasive species coming in, it would be where it was collected, not where that species originated from. So we're tracking locality records of collection events. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, so it's more on the specimen side.
Specimen level, yeah. But then that's the kind of research that somebody might do. They may come in and look at all the localities of records that we have for certain species and see maybe where it has moved over time, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So in order to do that kind of research, you need this kind of data. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
So if you want, we can look at the back. We have here beetles, flies, wasps, and bees, and Lepidoptera are our main things that are here. We have all of our fluid collection, which is anything that started out in the water when it was alive, is stored in fluid. And in addition, things like spiders, which are not insects, but through some historical accident we have them in our collection. They don't fare well when you dry them out, so some things are stored in fluids. All of that material is at West Campus. So everything is kind of like a library, right? Everything is in these bays. I'll show you guys something that you might recognize, because everybody likes that.
It's like my favorite part of the museum, like right in here in the collections.
And you guys might know the Luna moth.
Oh, that's my favorite.
Oh, he does talk about these. He has pictures of these.
Yeah, so we have lots of them. So here we have more than this number of drawers.
So are a lot of these like rarer or endangered species? Do you have?
We do have plenty of rare and endangered stuff. We also have plenty of common things.
Okay.
It kind of depends on what people have collected and donated and what we go out and collect.
So I have a question. So where do you get do people like donate specimens? Like do you collect specimens? Like where do you get your specimens?
Both. So now we only do sort of some very specific collecting. So collecting for things that maybe Larry is working on for his research, or if we have money to do a certain amount of collecting. So last year we had a small grant to do collecting at Yale Properties, just surveying of what was out there. So kind of across the board collecting, because we didn't have a lot of recent data on what's in those locations.
See that? So we're looking at local stuff, like local things that would be in gardens.
Yeah, but people also, you'd be surprised how many people have personal collections, how many sort of amateur insect enthusiasts create large collections in their homes, and then as they get older, they want to ensure that those specimens are protected and they donate them to the museum. So both of those things happen a lot.
Okay.
Do you guys do any like specific research on like how like invasive species affect like insects? Like what sort of impact do they have on the environment?
So lots of people do research and come here looking at those kinds of things. We ourselves more do the management of the collection. So we have to know a certain amount of what's going on in the environment, and obviously we have to know about our collection, but mostly it's a resource for other researchers to come in. So we've certainly had people do that kind of work. We've had people do all kinds of work. We had somebody come just last week from the University of Rhode Island who was trying to track some Saturniids, this group of moths, and some sphingids, which is what I just showed you, on island populations in New England and the relationship with a parasitic a parasitic fly that had been introduced to try and eradicate gypsy moths. But this fly could have a lot of different hosts.
Right.
And so the hypothesis is that it has had an impact on other species that weren't intended, right? And so this guy was tracking size variation in these groups of moths relative to where he thinks this fly was at various times to see what the relationship is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like the sort of thing that,
Okay, and then if a researcher comes here, like, what are they typically expecting to find? They want to be able to see, like, the location of specimens.
The location is critical.
Observe them.
Yeah, so it obviously depends on the research. So this guy coming wanted to measure them, so he couldn't just look at, the locality data online. If we had photos of every specimen with a scale bar, then he could do that work from a distance, but we're not at that point yet with our digitization. So he had to come in and measure the length of the wing of each specimen, right? So, but, if somebody was working on something else, they would need some other parameters. In general, locality is always critical. First of all, because you can't determine what species something is without knowing where it's from. Because you can have distinct species that look very, very similar, but it's one species in one location and another species in another location because they haven't had contact in, who knows how long. So you have to be able to know where it was from in order to determine it. So you can't really do research on something if you don't know what it is, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's critical. A lot of people care about when it was collected because the populations change over time, especially given the impact of our civilization on all of these species, right? So something may have been here 100 years ago and it may not be here today. So that's usually critical information. And then it just varies by what the research project is.
So going back to what you said about like that parasitic fly it was, how do you as like entomologists or the field of entomology, how do you kind of take control of like invasive species or like their impact on like the environment? Are there anything that like you guys do in particular to like, suppress that?
So there have been lots of attempts, right? Have you guys heard of the cane toads that were introduced?
Yes.
Yeah, so that tends to be what happens.
Yeah.
Right? So when people come in and say, with exactly what you're saying, that, we want to get rid of pesticides, we're all for that because we see a lot of the damage that pesticides have done. For example, there's an arthropods course here at Yale, and they go on a field trip to Florida every year. This past year, there just weren't very many insects down there relative to previous years. One hypothesis for why that might be is that people have been spraying for Zika down there. Right? So it's and this is just a guess. I'm speculating. I don't have data, so don't take this as a fact, right? But it's possible that the spraying for Zika, there's spray from planes, the spray travels, it could have an impact on any number of insect species, right? Yeah. So yes, pesticides are bad, but when you introduce a certain species, there are so many variables, and we just don't understand well enough what the impact is going to be. So, that it pretty much has never gone well. There's never been a case where it has worked. So this fly species, the genus is Compsognathus. If you wanted to look it up, there's plenty of work that has been done on it, introduced to deal with gypsy moths, which are a problematic invasive species that can completely defoliate a number of different trees, right? That didn't work. It had very little impact on the gypsy moths, and then this fungus came in and has controlled the gypsy moth population. That was not something that people did, right? It just happened, and it worked a lot better than Compsognathus, which then itself became an invasive, problematic species.
So it's important to remember that if we're going to continue with our project, we want to be like providing insects that are native to the area, so we're not introducing anything that is going to have a negative impact.
Yeah,
and then also definitely. I guess that makes sense to me, and a lot of that's on the bigger scale of like controlling populations as a whole. So obviously on a bigger scale you have more variables to think about because you can't really predict it. I guess the goal of our project is to do it really small scale. So like if we looked at a garden. And then I have a kind of specific question for you, which is just a concern I had going into the project, which is like, ideally, you're providing native species to tackle invasive species, but would you consider all pests invasive? Or is that something that like just naturally should happen?
So I don't know what the technical definition of pest is. Yeah. Certainly my understanding is that it's whatever bothers us as humans.
Right.
Yeah, that's what it is.
So, which is very subjective. So if you decide something is bothering you, then it counts as a pest. Yeah. And I don't think it has anything to do with whether it's an invasive species or not. Maybe there is some technical definition of pest that is used in, pest control literature. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's pretty subjective. One person may think that honeybees are pests if they're allergic to honeybee stings and
Right.
they want them out of their garden,
Yeah.
right? But of course, most of us wouldn't think that honeybees were pests.
And I think that's some of the concerns because a lot of garden plants aren't necessarily native, so
Right.
they're not really, I guess, and that makes our project harder because now it is a natural ingredient in an ecosystem that we're
Yeah.
taking out.
And you could consider a lot of those plant species to be pests,
Yeah.
right? People are
Right.
planting things like bamboo that they're buying at the hardware store and then it propagates like crazy. That definitely is an invasive problematic species. One might think that
Right.
itself is the pest, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think on a smaller scale, this is definitely, I don't want to say it's a doable project, but certainly conceptually it has, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people certainly successfully use ladybugs to control aphids, for example.
Yeah, we could look at that.
But I think, the other thing is that pesticides sort of are on a spectrum, right? So if I have aphids at home on my garden, I would use soapy water to get rid of the aphids, which
Okay.
is fairly safe. It's not
Mhm.
going to have a detrimental effect on most things. And the downside is that it requires a lot of work in order to use that to control the aphids, right? But
Mhm.
that's a one personal case kind of a basis. I think part of the difficulty with this project, although it's an awesome idea, is just that you're running into the problem that we always run into in entomology, which is that the diversity is extreme. And so
Right.
the number of variables is extreme. Something that's going to affect one thing, the effects are going to snowball and ripple outward in ways that are unpredictable. But that's also where a lot of research comes from,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Is the fact that we have these effects that we didn't expect, and so we can study them and learn things that we may not have intended to learn.
Okay. And I guess this is a question that we probably could do more research into. But do you know a lot about like the local insect species around here?
Well, so again, because insects are some 80% of species worldwide,
There's a lot.
there are, maybe 160,000 species of moths worldwide. That's just moths, right?
That's
Yeah.
insane.
And there's probably some 50-something thousand species of moths that we know of just in the U.S. So then there are many, that's not even an entire order of insects, right? That's
Mhm.
one part of an order of insects. But we do know, so I can show you guys, for example, which butterflies live in Connecticut. So
Okay.
there are lots of insect groups that are relatively, the number of species is not as overwhelming. So butterflies are one such group. With that said, can I tell you everything that, let's see there. They don't label, they're usually in here. I just have to find it. It's out somewhere. Connecticut butterflies. Here we go, all the way at the bottom. So this is pretty much all the butterflies that we have here in Connecticut, right? But this is a really, 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 really small number in proportion to the moths. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we go out collecting a lot. We have a general sense of what we might expect to see around here, what common species there are, especially of the bigger things. But there are also, orders of insects that are very small and not well known. Just this morning we had 2 kinds of juvenile springtails, which is tiny, tiny, tiny insects, a couple of millimeters long, that came into the museum, and we spent an hour this morning trying to figure out what they were.
Wow.
Right? Even though they're just local, probably really common species, we could only even get them to the order, let alone, a more specific taxonomic category.
Okay. So yeah, I guess just fitting the build of the kind of insect that we'd be looking for. I did a bit of research on this, and there are some that are like blanket predators. They eat a lot of things, and what keeps them from becoming invasive is they don't have a lot of children. So because they don't have as many offspring, that helps control their population size, even though they have a lot of
Should we go back out where it's
natural prey. So I guess that if I needed to give you a bio of the kind of bug we're looking for, it's something more along those lines. That's a
you're
predator of a
saying
lot of things.
You're
But
looking for some specific thing that would kind of take out pests in general, but not.
yeah, but then if it turns out it eats like
out of
earthworms or something that's beneficial, then you also have that problem. So
I mean, I don't think you're going to find, you're looking for something really specific, right?
Right.
You're not going to find it. You're much better off, I think, looking for species that target a certain group, right? So like
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
ladybug-aphid relationship, for example. Or there's a wasp called the cicada killer wasp that eats only cicadas. Now that's not very useful because cicadas don't really do much damage.
Right.
But that kind of thing would probably be more useful. So I think,
Okay.
If you were to really have this business model and really make an app, I think a good way of doing it might be to see what pests people were complaining about first.
Yeah.
Kind of get test cases of pests and then go from there in targeting a strategy for each.
Yeah. And we researched some of
So
that,
like
yeah.
part of our project is the person would provide like pictures of, if they could, of the pests attacking their garden or the damage that's done. So like, is it in the roots of the plant? Is it in the stem, in the leaf itself? And that would like provide a more
So you
like
have
targeted
like a
approach.
key where they could pick
Right.
like a field guide style key. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be a good strategy.
We researched common garden pests in Connecticut, which I think is probably, I mean, obviously there are going to be more specific examples, and this would only be targeting like a local scale of things. So
Right.
Right.
we probably could find pretty specific. Do you think we could find specific insects that would like target each pest, like you talk about,
No.
like no. Okay.
I think no. I mean, that would be nice for us in an ideal world that was designed
Yeah.
to make humans happy.
Right.
But no. I mean, I think the cases that we have found of that are kind of luck cases.
Just okay.
Probably, for example, in terms of lepidopter, probably the pests that you're getting in garden are like the hornworms, the spinach
Yeah.
or hawk moth larvae that eat a lot of the mustard family plants, like broccoli and stuff like that. Those are really common pests. Is there something specific that eats those? There's lots of parasitoids that are wasps and flies that lay their eggs in the egg or the larva or the pupa of the moth, right? But in fact, not that much work has been done on host-parasite relationships.
Right.
So, I mean, there has been some done, but not enough that we know exactly which species of parasitoid are going to target which species of host, at least not across the board. We may have a few examples, but a lot of them are generalists. So a lot of these parasitoids can lay eggs in many different kinds of species. So that data is probably not really out there.
Okay.
Maybe it will be out there in the future, but unfortunately the number of entomology projects relative to the number of entomologists is not great.
Right. I have a question kind of going back to like the general idea of like entomology. So you talked about like what you guys do here. So why is entomology like important to the world? Like what do entomologists do? Like some of the more like in detail like things that maybe they do, like the research they collect, other than like areas of like where they come.
So I mentioned how diverse insects are, right? So most of the diversity on the planet is insects, but also you guys may have seen statistics about the biomass of insects relative to humans, right? There are a lot of insects, and they're integral to every aspect of the ecosystem, right? Everything from breaking down leaf litter into soil, which if you don't do that, then the leaves would sit forever on the surface of the soil and not decay, and then we wouldn't have soil, right? Everything from that to pollinating our plants. I'm sure you guys have heard of this sort of bee die-off crisis that we're facing. That's kind of critical. If the pollinators die off, the plants can't pollinate, the plants die, pretty soon we don't have food, nobody has food, right? That's critical to our existence. And those are just two, easy examples. We also use insects for medical research. People have done all kinds of research on various kinds of venoms that insects have as possible medical treatment opportunities. They're a really good indicator of what's going on in ecosystems, in part because they have relatively short life cycles, and so they can evolve quickly. So they respond to changes more quickly than some other species might, and so we can use them kind of as a metric of human impact on ecosystems. Also, for the same reason, we learn about evolution from them. So everybody has done in the high school biology class, right, something with fruit flies.
Mhm.
Because their life cycle is so short that you can look at evolution essentially in action. So we learn a lot about genetics from insects in a way that it would be impossible for us as humans to learn about genetics from, say, elephants, which live just as long as we do sometimes, right? Is that helpful?
Yeah, definitely.
So, one of the nice things about working in entomology is there's an infinity of stuff to work on. There are many, 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 many species of insects that live here in Connecticut that we don't know anything about. we don't even know what they are. There are probably undiscovered species of insects in many different orders of insects here in Connecticut. That work has yet to be done. So we're just barely scratching the surface of what we know. And they interact all the time with every aspect of the ecosystem. So there's pretty much nothing that is not
That it doesn't cover,
right,
yeah.
that you can't find in entomology.
Do you have any more questions?
I guess. I can give you one more question, which is just if we were to do experiments for this kind of thing.
For your project.
Yeah. So ideally we would control them, right? We would put them in a little enclosed area and then test it, but the problem is that's not at all how they'd interact in the wild. So is there any, like, do you guys ever do experiments? Like how do you balance between keeping a controlled experiment and then also considering like the other factors that would influence it in the real world? Like,
I mean, it's always really tricky to try and control all the variables. I think a lot of what gets done, I mean, again, it depends on what kind of experiment you're doing, right?
yeah.
But a lot of it is sort of a balance between putting actually things outside and controlling and observing. So a lot of it is recording and observing. In entomology, there's usually a lot of time spent outside with a notebook in front of things, watching what happens and tracking things. And there is kind of a middle ground. So for example, if you wanted to look at these moths that their caterpillars eat these plants, one thing that people do to raise moths is they collect the eggs or they collect the caterpillars or they mate the adults and collect the eggs from the female. And then they put them in sleeves outside. So they'll put the larvae in, the caterpillars in like a mesh bag and then tie it to a tree branch. So that it's outside, and it's getting light and it's getting rain and it's getting everything, but predators can't access it. Right? So there are sort of middle ground strategies like that where you can reduce some of the variables, you can reduce the predation. But it's very tricky. So if you're studying parasitoids that attack those caterpillars, you can't really sit there all day and watch to see if a wasp lays eggs in the caterpillar, right? But you might, say, collect a large number of this kind of caterpillar, bring them in, raise them in the house or in your lab or wherever, see if you see any signs that they have parasites.
Okay.
You know, watch for what kinds of parasites emerge, then track what species of parasites emerge.
Yeah.
That's not easy to do, but it's, not impossible either.
Yeah.
Is that helpful?
That is helpful because we're doing this is an expo project, but we're doing it in our chemistry class. So our chemistry teacher is going to want to have them all in, little aquariums where like the amount of light and everything is controlled. And I guess we do have to balance that between like how it would work outside.
Yeah.
So you talked about surveying. You guys do like go through and like chat. How does that work? Because we could do something like that conceivably where we like survey it once through, introduce them to like a smaller area, and then survey it again and see.
Well, so the survey that I was talking about was sort of a bio-blitz style survey where you go out for a certain length of time and you collect or at least take photos of or write down every single thing that you find in the numbers, right?
Okay.
So you could do something like that. You could go into various gardens, if you're looking at vegetable gardens or whatever, go into various vegetable gardens, find every insect you can in that area and collect them and compare them across gardens. You could see what the common species are in terms of numbers and in terms of how many of each garden has that species, right? Or you could also document where you found them, what plant did you find them on, so that you would have a sense of which species eat what plants. Probably a lot of that is done for you because the insects that people typically care about are the insects that are bothering them.
Right.
That's probably true.
So that's probably almost all going to be online in terms of what eats what, ornamental plant or food plant or whatever. But that's the kind of surveying that you could do. And then, if you introduce something, if you say brought in a bunch of ladybugs to tackle aphids, then you could certainly, go back and document how the numbers had changed over the course of the experiment.
Yeah, but that actually, from less of a science standpoint, from like we present this and we take it in a booth, that would be really cool to have.
Yeah.
Like samples of each insect that we, I guess, preserve similar to what you do.
Yeah.
So
you could do that.
I'm sure there's guides on how to do that. Like
there's totally guides on how to do that. You guys are also welcome if you have questions, like if you find something and you can't figure out what it is, or if you want to know how to preserve specimens or whatever, you can always shoot me an email.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, we want to, part of the job of the museum, even the collection side, is just to share this information
Yeah.
and kind of do it from the education aspect of things. So yeah, we're happy to help.
Okay.
That's useful.